So we're going to start off lightly sketching this in pencil onto this piece of paper. And I also suggest before you get started to write your name on one side so we know whose is whose, because everybody's going to look identical. Okay. Again, there should be rulers on all tables. So first off, looking at this, you'll see that the horizon line, the line where, in this case, the water and earth touch the sky, is higher than halfway up the page. Okay, you want to pay attention to stuff like that. A lot of times we naturally want to put things in the center. Compositionally, putting a horizon line directly in the center of the page is kind of boring, so you want to avoid that. So I'm going to just go ahead, I'm going to eyeball it. We don't have to be super precise with this one. So you can see I'm over halfway, and I'm just going to draw a light line across the top. And you know what, I drew mine too high up. So the good news is, because you're starting in pencil, if you do what I just did, you can erase it and do it again. This is the same paper that we're going to use for the final. It's like a cardstock. Okay, next I'm going to do just my basic shapes. So again, if I'm looking at this image here, I can see that, move this over. I can see that this part of the bridge is actually up. I'm going to put a little dot where that is. Okay, and then I'm going to sight the angle. So again, all those studio art facets of sighting should come into play. Then as I go here, I'm going to sight that angle. Going to do the same thing here. I want to look and see where this is. Now obviously there's a couple boards that stick out, but I noticed that it's beyond the halfway point. And I'm going to sight that angle as well. And again, I'm going to sight this angle. So because it is going back into space, things get smaller as they get further away. The line where this little bridge or deck, whatever you want to call it, ends is a horizontal line. So there's our basic shape. And one thing you always want to notice, these posts that stick up, although some of them are a little bit crooked, they are fairly vertical. So a lot of times when people are going back into space, they kind of start changing angles of things, and that will kind of goof up how it looks. So I'm going to just draw in some basic things here. You can see this is kind of just, these come down. And again, I'm not super concerned with this demo on getting everything super, super accurate. This demo is really more about how to mix color and create gradations using tempera paint. I can lightly draw in the boat. And it really kind of is just an abstract shape, so that's exactly how you draw it. So tempera paint is the same paint you've used ever since you were probably real little in elementary school. It's a water-based paint, and a lot of times, because we've used it since we were little and it's non-toxic, and we think it's not a really good art medium, but actually you can get excellent results with tempera paint. It's definitely, you know, looked as, you know, not a fancy medium, but you can get really fancy results with it. And it's not expensive to buy, which is always another plus if you end up liking it. It's a water-based paint, so you definitely, if you get it on your clothes, which I always advise you not to, but if you do, you should be able to get it out, pre-treat your clothes when you get home. Put some laundry detergent on the spot where you got the paint. Let it sit for about 10 minutes, scrub it out by hand before you throw it in the washer. There is the potential that it will stain due to the pigment color. It's kind of hit or miss in terms of the look of the draw. Okay, so you can see here I just kind of drew in lightly some of the tree / mountain-esque kind of landscape. How much you draw in really depends on your comfort level. I'm gonna just very lightly draw in some basic shapes of where these trees are gonna go. I don't wanna get super detailed with it because ultimately, you're just gonna paint it in. Same thing if there are any definitive cloud shapes that you feel more comfortable drawing in first, you can do that. Sometimes it helps. I think I drew that entirely too big. Paint is very forgiving. A lot of times we freak out like, oh my God, it's the wrong color, I painted it. You just paint over it. It's not the end of the world. Now, just like I was a little bit crazy when it came to color and portraiture, I don't really change at all. So I still get a little crazy with color here. And again, looking at the colors that you actually see are going to be pretty important. Again, I'm just going to draw in a couple extra things here. Now, in general, with painting, although we break these rules all the time, we tend to want to paint the most exciting thing first, right? Because that's fun. And usually the most exciting things to paint are in the foreground or middle ground, okay? Can you do that? Absolutely. I break those rules all the time. But in general, you really want to start painting background to foreground, and you want to start by blocking in general color and value before you get into fussy detail. It's just a good rule of thumb. Sometimes what happens if you start in on an area that's closer and you spend all that time working it to, you know, its perfection, what happens is you get so afraid to ruin it by painting around it that you leave a little bit of a gap and it creates like a halo effect. Now, not all people do that, but I have seen it more often than not. So if you start with the background, you can always overlap. This is a paint that you can paint on fairly opaquely. So you don't have to worry about that gap happening. As well, it just physically makes sense because again, background is in the back, middle ground overlaps it, so you need to overlap it. You wouldn't want to paint in these trees and then try to paint in the sky around the trees. That's just creating more work than necessary. Okay, now the little scrap of paper I had you grab is to use for testing colors. It's always good to have a piece to test on, especially your darker colors, your blues, your purples. They're so hard to see if you have them mixed right, that it really does help if you have a piece to kind of wipe it down on. So in your paint palette, what you're gonna do is you're gonna have a little bit of blue. You don't have to fill it all the way up because if you need more, it's right at your table. A little bit of red. You'll notice I only give you primary colors because you can make everything you need. And I'm gonna add white. So I got 4 colors I added into my paint palette. And I spaced them out so that I have areas to blend. Because Tempera is a water-based paint, you want to make sure that you dry off your brush in between cleaning it off with the water. If your brush is super wet, it's going to thin out your paint. You can actually get really nice watercolor effects with tempera paint. Okay, sometimes you'll want to do that, but in this case, if we wanted it to look like watercolor, we would just use watercolor, right? All right. Now, when you look at the top corner of the sky here, is it just straight blue? Look at your image. It looks better on the actual copy than it does on the screen. No. What color do you think it needs a little of? Yeah. So this is kind of a blue-violet color. So first thing I want to do is I'm going to take some blue. And I'm going to add the red very slowly. If you add too much, then you'll end up, number 1, wasting a lot of time, and number 2, wasting paint. Okay, so that didn't really change it much, so I'm going to add some more. So it almost looks like a navy color. But is it that dark? No. So you're going to want to add a little bit of white. And again, add it slowly. You don't have to remake the paint already. So by adding that, I see I need to add a little bit more red to mine. Be prepared to mix the same color or attempt to mix the same color numerous times because it's nearly guaranteed that you will run out of paint. So get ready for it. Okay, I think it's still a little bit on the dark side. So I'm gonna add a little bit more white. You want to try to avoid mixing your paint on your paper, only because water on paper, the fibers start to tear up a little bit. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start painting it on. Can you see? Again, make sure your water isn't saturated with, or make sure your brush isn't saturated with water so the paint actually covers. Now, as you move down, you see it does get a little bit lighter and a little bit bluer. So you can either take some of your paint. I'm gonna add a little more blue to it too. Huh? I did, but I'm gonna end up covering it. So I put this lighter blue down, and what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna take the more blue violet or navy blue, and you can see how I kind of work it together so it kind of gradates. So again, I'm gonna lay down this bluer color and take a little bit of that other one. I'm kind of working them in together on my paper. Tempera paint does kind of reactivate once it's dry when you get it wet. And again, sometimes it's kind of hard to verbalize while you're painting. So if you want to watch for a minute, watch me do a section and then emulate it, that may be the easier way to go. As we start getting right behind the trees, you also see it starts to go towards a pink area. So I'm gonna take some white, add some red to it. But it's not just pink, it's kind of a corally pink. So I'm gonna add a little yellow to it as well. I am notorious for not cleaning my brush off in between colors, which, let's be honest, some of you are too. The bad thing about that is you contaminate your paint. I usually can make it work anyway, but just saying, you may want to clean off your brushes. Again, I'm going to, now if you get down here, you'll see it goes to a lighter kind of blue, and then it goes into a kind of a pastel purple into that coral pink. So I'm gonna take white, I'm gonna add a little bit more of that navy color I made. I'm gonna add a little bit of, well, that was way too much. This is what I do. Okay, and I'm gonna use a little bit of that color I just made and kind of mix that together. You'll see it kind of turns almost grayish. Not what I wanted. And again, I'm gonna kind of lay that in. Clean off my brush with a damp, not dripping wet, but damp, clean brush. I can then blend the areas together so that there's a nice transition from one color to another, because that's what happens in the sky. Then underneath, I'm gonna follow in with that coral color. Again, clean, slightly damp brush, continually cleaning it off. I can work the colors into each other so you have a nice gradation happening.
End of part 1.